Time now for Sid Cixero. This is where I get 60 seconds to talk. Start the clock, please. Here's what's on my mind this morning. There's an old adage in sports that says, when you lose, say little. When you win, say less. Well, those that lost this past weekend didn't say a little. They said a lot. Let's begin with Portugal's loss to Morocco. May have heard on Saturday at the World Cup. Defender Pep wasn't impressed that the match official was from Argentina, considering that country is still alive in the tournament. Said Pep after the game, quote, "They can now give the title to Argentina," end quote. Closer to home, Calgary Flames head coach Darryl Sutter, whose team lost to the Leafs this past Saturday, wasn't happy that his club got whistled for 7 penalties. Said Sutter, quote, "That's the one thing I learned a long time ago. When you come into Toronto, you know what goes on. I won't say anything more," end quote. What's the lesson surrounding all of this? In sports, it's not whether you win or lose. It's how many other people you can blame if you do lose. The more you know, kids. You're welcome. JD Bunkis from Sportsnet590 The Fan of the JD Bunkis podcast joining us. JD, initial question. Who had the bigger beef this weekend? The Portuguese soccer program or Darryl Sutter?
The answer is neither. They're both being huge babies. What are you talking about? I watched the Portugal game. You lost. You just lost. It sucks to lose. It really sucks, especially on that stage. And Darryl Sutter, what are you talking about? Go back and look at those penalties, Sid. Like, if you replay any of them, there's basically no ticky-tacks in the entire bunch. They're all stick penalties. That's just the modern NHL. I think that Darryl Sutter is just mad about the way that you can construct a team today, or that the officials did well. This is just poor sportsmanship.
Yeah, 100%. And I just find, listen, I'll get to the Portuguese thing a little later on here with Devo. The notion that the Toronto Maple Leafs, a team that has not won a Stanley Cup since before half of our audience was actually born, gets calls at home constantly is just laughable. It's like, have you ever in your life heard anyone complain about that? I've heard the Leafs complain, well, listen, a lot of Toronto kids come in on Saturday nights and they're jacked up and this is the biggest game of their life. I've heard that a million times. The Leafs get calls at home? Please.
See, it's funny because if you're from Toronto, your belief is that because there are so many officials that are from here, they're worried about being biased and in turn give too many bad calls to the Leafs. Like, that's the way that it works here. No, man, that's just part of being a sports fan. It's disappointing when you start to see it go to coaches and to leaders when they start disseminating stuff like that, because that's when conspiracy stuff ends up happening with fans. That's when you start to drive yourself crazy. If it works, it works. But to me, it's very babyish. I get it a little bit more on the World Cup stage because it's so big and so immense that a thing like that could drive you nuts. And when it's all said and done, you would just be way more prone to saying something like that. But for Darryl Sutter, a coach, a guy who's been a part of the NHL for decade upon decades, to pretend like Toronto has had some big advantage in the league when, they haven't won since there's been 6 teams is kind of laughable.
Now, let's go one last thing about the World Cup, because it has started a discussion, and it's not a new discussion, about whether officials from certain countries should be allowed to referee when their own country is still in the tournament, which did take place in the Morocco and Portugal game. Is that a non-story to you? We've got about 30 seconds. Non-story, or is there something there?
I think it's a tiny bit of a story just because this is a tournament where it doesn't always feel like it's on the most up and up. So I would say that you would probably now, in the world of sports betting especially, want to make sure that everything looks like you can check every single box when it comes to credibility. But to me, it's a really, really far-fetched story to believe that actually had an impact on that game.
I 100% agree with you. JD Bunkis podcast, 9 to 11, daily Sportsnet 590 The Fan. JD, good stuff, man. Have a good day. Take care.
Thanks, brother. You too.
He's great. Follow him on Twitter.